Raise your voice at me again, and I'm done, I told her, and the entire 40th floor stopped breathing. 6 weeks earlier, I was rehearsing an apology I hadn't earned for a mistake I hadn't made, whispering it to the fluorescent lights above my desk because that was safer than saying it to a mirror and seeing my own face believe it. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 29 years old, a senior financial analyst at Voss Capital, and if you had asked anyone on that floor to describe me, they would have needed a full minute to remember I existed at all. That was the point. Omegas who wanted to survive in rooms like that one learned to take up less space than the furniture. I had learned it early, and I had learned it well. The building took up an entire block of glass and steel downtown, 41 floors stacked like a threat, and on the 40th floor sat the office of Odessa Voss, chief executive of a firm that managed more money than some small nations, and a woman the financial press had nicknamed the Vault. Not because she kept secrets, though she did. Because nothing that went in ever came back out. Not warmth, not mercy, not, as far as anyone could tell, a single unscripted feeling. I had worked 11 feet from her office door for 2 years, and she had spoken to me exactly 4 times, and 3 of those times had been to correct my math in front of other people. That Monday made it 5. The discrepancy was small on paper and enormous in the room. $40,000 misrouted through a shell account in a client ledger that had my initials stamped on the approval line. I hadn't approved it. I had flagged the account 11 days earlier as irregular and sent the flag up the chain, where it had apparently died a quiet death somewhere between my inbox and the people who were supposed to act on it. None of that mattered once Odessa Voss stood in the center of the analyst floor at 9 in the morning holding a printout like it was evidence at a trial. "Explain this," she said, and her voice did the thing it always did, flat and cold enough to lower the room's temperature by degrees you could feel in your teeth. I explained. I showed her the flag, the date, the routing number that didn't match anything I had ever touched. She did not look at the papers I offered. She looked at me the way you look at a stain you're deciding whether to bother cleaning. "I don't pay you to flag problems and then let them happen anyway," she said. "I pay you to prevent them." Around us, 20 people found extremely urgent reasons to stare at their monitors. I felt my face go hot, then cold, then hot again, my scent souring under the suppressant I'd taken that morning like every morning, brown butter and crushed marigold curdling into something closer to burnt sugar and panic. Omegas aren't supposed to still smell like anything under a full dose. Mine never fully complied. It was one more small, defective thing about me that I had spent a decade learning to apologize for before anyone could ask. "That account was flagged," I said again, quieter, because quieter was safer. "Then flag it louder next time," Odessa said, and turned to go, and that should have been the end of it, the same as the other 4 times. A wound I would carry home and nurse alone in my apartment with the lights off. It wasn't. Because 2 feet from her office door, Trent Ashby leaned back in his chair with the particular smile men like him save for exactly these moments, and said, not quite under his breath, "Guess the nesting instinct doesn't come with a math instinct built in." And the floor laughed, not loud, just enough, just the exact amount of laughter designed to be deniable if anyone ever asked about it later. Something in me that had been folding itself smaller for 2 years simply stopped folding. I don't remember deciding to speak. I remember the words arriving already finished, like they'd been waiting behind my teeth the whole time. "Raise your voice at me again," I said, to her back, to the woman who had never once turned around when I spoke, "and I'm done." She stopped. The whole floor stopped with her. 40 desks worth of people who had spent 2 years pretending I was furniture suddenly could not stop looking at me, and I understood, distantly, underneath the roar of my own pulse, that I had just done something no one on that floor had done in the 5 years Odessa Voss had run this company. I had drawn a line and dared her to cross it. She turned around slowly. Her eyes were the gray of a sky before weather, and they moved over my face like she was reading something written there in very small print. "Say that again," she said. My hands were shaking. I laced them together so no one would see. "Raise your voice at me again. And I'm done. I'll walk out of this building and I won't come back, and you can explain to the board why the person who's been catching your fraud for 8 months quit over being called a nesting instinct with a calculator." The silence that followed had a texture to it. I could hear the elevator chime 3 floors down. "You caught fraud," Odessa said. "Not a question, a test." 11 days ago. The flag is still in the system if anyone had bothered to open it. Her gaze didn't leave my face, not once, not even to glance at Trent, who had gone very still in his chair the way animals do when a bigger animal has entered the clearing. "My office," she said. Now, I expected to be fired walking there. I had my resignation half composed in my head, the dignified kind, the kind you write so you can read it back to yourself later and believe you survived something. I did not expect her to close the door behind us, cross to her desk, and say the sentence that 6 weeks later I would still be turning over in my hands like a coin I couldn't decide whether to spend. "You're right," she said. "I won't." Every closed door in that building might as well have opened at once. That was how loud the silence on the other side of it felt. I stood there in a corner office with a view of the entire river district, in front of a woman the financial press said had ice water instead of blood, and I understood in one long, falling second that I had just watched the vault crack, and that no one, not Trent, not the 40 people at their desks pretending not to listen, not I, had any idea yet what was underneath. Odessa gestured me into the chair across from her desk. She didn't sit. She stood at the window with her back to the river, arms crossed, and studied me the way you'd study a lock you'd assumed for years was rusted shut and had just unexpectedly turned. "Tell me about the flag," she said. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out because you think it makes you look small." I told her about the shell routing, the 3 transactions that didn't match their stated purpose, the pattern I'd noticed only because I'd spent 4 years memorizing the rhythm of this company's money the way other people memorize a favorite song, and how the rhythm had gone wrong in a way that felt, to me, less like an accident and more like a hand deliberately out of tune. I told her I'd sent it up the chain to my supervisor, Marcus Feld, and never heard another word. Something crossed her face at his name. Small, gone in under a second. I filed it away without understanding yet what it meant. "Show me," she said. I opened my laptop on her desk with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and for the next 40 minutes I did something I had never once been allowed to do in 2 years at that company. I worked in full view of the person actually in charge of it. Uninterrupted, unmocked, while she watched over my shoulder with an attention so total it had its own weight. I walked her through the shell account, then 2 more I'd found buried under different departments, then a pattern of withdrawals timed to always land 3 days after quarterly audits closed, when no one was looking anymore. "You found 3 of these," Odessa said. "How long would it take you to find all of them?" "I don't know how many there are. Guess, given the pattern," I said, "and how long it's probably been running. 6, maybe more." She was quiet for a moment. Up close, standing at her own shoulder the way I was, I could smell her for the first time in 2 years of proximity, without ever being close enough. Clove smoke and wet slate, cold and dark and entirely still. The scent of someone who had trained even her own body not to give anything away. It did something strange to the base of my throat. I ignored it. It seemed like the only professional option. Marcus Feld has been my chief operating officer for 9 years, she said. He was my mother's hire before he was mine. I'm not accusing anyone, I said quickly. I'm telling you what the numbers do. I know the difference, Odessa said, and something almost like approval moved through her voice, brief as a match strike. Most people don't. She turned from the window fully then and looked at me the way she had looked at me on the analyst floor, except this time I understood I wasn't being cataloged as a stain. I was being recalculated. You're being reassigned, she said. Effective this morning, you'll report directly to me, not to Feld, not to anyone but me, until I say otherwise. Reassigned to what? To finding out exactly how much has been taken, and by whom, before whoever is doing it realizes someone finally noticed. She paused. You'll need executive floor clearance. My assistant will process it within the hour. I sat there in a chair on the 40th floor of a building I had spent 2 years trying to be invisible inside, and felt the ground under my life tilt so hard I had to grip the arms of the chair to stay upright. Why me? I asked, because it was the only question that mattered. You've watched me get talked over for 2 years and never said a word. Why does this get you to notice I exist? Odessa considered the question longer than I expected, long enough that I thought she might not answer it at all, because you didn't ask me to stop raising my voice, she said finally. You told me what would happen if I did it again. There's a difference, and in 9 years no one in this building has understood it. She turned back toward the window, toward the river, going silver under the noon light. I don't apologize, she added, almost to herself, but I don't forget, either. I didn't know yet that I would hear that sentence again, on a night I would not be able to predict from where I sat that afternoon, and that it would mean something entirely different by the time I did. I left her office with a new badge, a new floor, and the particular vertigo of having been seen, all at once after 2 years of being furniture. Behind me, through the glass wall of the office, I caught Marcus Feld watching from the far end of the corridor, his expression arranged into something pleasant and utterly unconvincing. And I understood, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with numbers, that I had just made an enemy who had known exactly what he was doing for a very long time. The executive floor smelled like money the way old libraries smell like paper, a quiet so complete it had texture. My new desk sat in an alcove 20 feet from Odessa's door, close enough that I could hear her voice through the wall when it dropped low, far enough that I still felt, that first week, like an animal that had wandered somewhere it wasn't supposed to survive. Priya Nakamura, head of corporate security and, as far as I could tell, the only person in the building Odessa fully trusted, looked at me for a long moment on my first morning and said, "She's never pulled anyone up from the floor like this. Not once. 15 years I've worked for this family, and I have never once seen her wait for someone to finish a sentence." She said it like a diagnosis she wasn't sure she believed yet. Don't waste it. I didn't plan to. I built a workspace out of borrowed conference rooms and government coffee, and I built, slowly, a map of 6 years of quiet theft threaded so carefully through Voss Capital's accounts that it had survived 4 external audits without a flicker. Whoever had built it understood the company's architecture from the inside, understood exactly where auditors stopped looking, understood the calendar of the whole institution down to the day. It read less like greed and more like patience, the kind that only comes from someone who has had 9 years to perfect it. The apartment gap hit me on day 3, when Odessa asked, without looking up from her screen, whether I'd eaten, and I realized I'd been living on vending machine coffee since Monday because my new commute ate the hour I used to spend making lunch. She said nothing. 20 minutes later, a tray appeared at my elbow, produced by an assistant I hadn't even seen enter, holding a bowl of something that smelled absurdly, unbearably like my mother's kitchen. Not close. Exact, brown butter and thyme, and the particular sear on the crust that only came from letting biscuits sit a beat too long in the pan on purpose, the way my mother used to. The dish I'd mentioned exactly once, in passing, to no one who should have remembered. How? I said, staring at it. You said it in the elevator on Tuesday, Odessa said, still not looking up. To Priya. Not to me. You weren't in the elevator. I was in the elevator, she said, and that was all, and I understood, sitting there with a lump rising in my throat over a plate of food, that Odessa Voss noticed everything, cataloged everything, and simply chose, almost violently, what she let anyone see her keep. It became a pattern I couldn't stop watching for. The proof of care arrived sideways, never announced, never claimed. A warmer coat left on the back of my chair the week the building's heating failed on the executive floor, and not the analyst floor below. A rerouted meeting, so I wouldn't have to pass Marcus Feld's office alone. Once, astonishingly, a mug, because Trent had shattered my mother's chipped one against the break room counter in my last week downstairs, laughing that it was an eyesore anyway, and I hadn't said anything, hadn't let anyone see it land, replaced with an identical one, down to the hairline crack near the handle, sourced. I never learned how, from a discontinued line 11 years out of production. I didn't cry about the mug at my desk. I want that on the record. I cried about it in the stairwell, where no one could see, and came back up composed and said nothing. Because some gifts are only gifts if you let the giver keep pretending they didn't give them. The rest of the executive floor did not extend the same courtesy of silence. Trent found reasons to visit floors he had no business on, always managing to say something just loud enough that I'd slept my way up, that Omegas always found an angle, that it must be nice to catch someone's eye instead of earning a promotion the hard way. As if the 8-month audit trail I'd built by hand wasn't earning. Feld was worse, in a quieter register. Always pleasant, always solicitous, always somehow present at exactly the meetings where my findings got discussed, watching me with an attention that had none of Odessa's stillness in it, and all of a predator's patience instead. The clue that changed everything came on a Thursday, filed in an old cabinet Priya let me into on a hunch, a decade-old employee file with the name Helena Cross on it and a termination date, and nothing else. No explanation, no severance record, just an abrupt stop. The kind of file that had been cleaned rather than closed. When I asked Priya about it, her face did something I hadn't seen it do before. "Don't ask her about that," Priya said. "Not unless you want to watch the vault close for good." "Who is she?" "Someone who used to matter," Priya said, before she made sure no one would ever matter to this family again, and would say nothing else, and I went back to my desk with a name I couldn't place, and a feeling, low and certain, that I had just found the first true edge of Odessa Voss. That evening, alone in the alcove long after the floor had emptied, I found the transaction that changed the shape of everything, a withdrawal routed not through Feld's known accounts, but through mine. My login. My credentials. Time-stamped to a Tuesday, I'd been out sick with a fever so bad I hadn't left my apartment. Someone had built the trail to lead, eventually, straight to me. I was still staring at the screen, my pulse loud in my ears, when Odessa's door opened behind me and her voice, low and controlled in the way that meant something underneath it was not, said my name for what felt like the first time she'd ever said it, like it belonged to a person and not a report. Wren, my office. Now, I turned, and the look on her face told me the summons hadn't come from her at all. It had come from upstairs, from the board, and whatever they'd told her had already started the fire I was about to walk into. The boardroom held 9 people I mostly knew by title rather than name. Mahogany table, a wall of glass showing the city gone gold with late light, and, at the head of it, a printout identical in shape to the one that had started all of this 6 weeks earlier, except this time my name was on every page. "Explain this," said the board chair, a silver-haired man named Averill, sliding the printout down the table until it stopped in front of me. 14 months. Nearly $2.3 million. Routed, according to every log we can find, through your credentials. Marcus Feld sat 2 seats down, hands folded, face arranged into an expression of pained, reluctant duty, the face of a man who hated having to bring this forward. "I found the pattern," I said. "I didn't build it. I reported an irregular account 11 days before. You reported one account," Feld said gently, cutting in with the softness of a man twisting a knife slowly enough to call it surgery. "Then spent 6 weeks with unprecedented access to every system in this company. It's an elegant cover, I'll give you that. Report the smallest piece so no one looks at the rest." "That's not what happened, Miss Voss," Averill said, turning to Odessa, who stood at the head of the table with her arms crossed and her face gone to the particular stillness I now understood cost her something to hold. "You elevated this employee against every normal channel, gave her unrestricted access, and now find that access at the center of a multi-million-dollar theft." "The board needs to understand your reasoning." "My reasoning," Odessa said, "was that she was the only person in this building who told me the truth even when it cost her something. That hasn't changed in the last hour, and it isn't going to change because someone printed a login timestamp." "With respect," Feld said, "logins don't lie." "People building a frame do," Odessa said, and looked at him for exactly 1 second too long, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes, there and gone. The flinch of a man who has just realized the ice he's standing on might not hold. The vote to suspend me pending investigation passed 7-2 anyway. Odessa's was one of the 2. It didn't matter. Averill's gavel word landed like a verdict regardless, and 20 minutes later I was standing in the lobby with a box containing 4 months of borrowed life, a cardigan, a photo of Dell at her nursing pinning ceremony, the repaired mug, wrapped in a paper towel because I hadn't trusted the box not to break it twice, while my badge failed against the turnstile in front of the security guard and everyone pretending not to watch. Odessa did not come down to stop it. I understood, even through the humiliation burning up my throat, that she couldn't, not without confirming exactly what Feld wanted confirmed, that there was something between us worth using as a weapon. Understanding it didn't make the elevator ride down 40 floors alone hurt any less. It didn't make the scent of my own fear, sour and unfamiliar even to me, any easier to carry out onto the sidewalk in front of strangers. My phone rang before I'd made it 2 blocks. Dell's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, because I didn't have anything left to offer anyone, and then I saw the second half of the message under her name, a voicemail, already transcribing. The words assembling themselves in jagged fragments across my screen, a man, saying her scholarship review had been flagged for irregularities, saying it would be a shame if anyone looked too closely at anything connected to her family, saying it in the specific, careful cadence of a threat dressed as a courtesy call. I stood on the sidewalk in the wind coming off the river and understood that Feld hadn't only come for my job, he'd come for the one person in the world I would burn everything down to protect, and he wanted me to know it. That night, I sat on my apartment floor with the mug in my lap, unwrapped now, whole, gold-veined where the old crack had been carefully repaired, rather than hidden, and I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself in the stairwell, the way I hadn't let myself in 6 years of being told what I was worth by people who had never once bothered to actually look. My phone buzzed once, near midnight, a single line from a number I hadn't saved because I'd never needed to. "I don't forget. Not this. Stay where I can reach you." I didn't answer. I didn't know yet what there was to say. But I held my phone against my chest like it was something warm, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I let myself believe that being seen might not always cost me everything it had cost before. Priya found me 2 days later, in the sort of coffee shop that doesn't ask questions, sliding into the booth across from me without waiting for an invitation. A leather folder under one arm that she set on the table between us like a small, deliberate bomb. "She's not supposed to know I'm here," Priya said. "For what it's worth, I don't care." "Know what?" "That I've been pulling security logs for the last 36 hours instead of sleeping." She opened the folder. Inside were badge access printouts, timestamps, a grainy still from a hallway camera showing a figure at a server room door at 2 a.m. on the night before my login had supposedly moved $2.3 million. The figure wasn't me. It wasn't even close to my build. Feld's assistant, using a maintenance badge that was reported lost 8 months ago. I cross-referenced it against every withdrawal on your printout. Every single one lines up with a night this badge was used, going back 14 months. I stared at the still image until the shape stopped swimming. "This proves it. It proves someone used a badge that isn't yours," Priya said. "It doesn't prove who was wearing it, and Feld's smart enough to know that. We need the money trail to close the loop, not just the door log." She tapped the folder. "You're the only person who can read that trail fast enough to matter before he moves the rest of it offshore. Odessa thinks he's already started. I don't have access anymore." "No," Priya agreed. "But I do. And in 15 years, I've never once seen her wait for anyone the way she's been waiting on you to walk back through that door." She said it flatly, the way you'd report a fact about the weather, and something in the flatness made it land harder than sympathy would have. "She hasn't raised her voice at anyone since you left. Not once. It's the longest quiet I've ever heard out of that office, and I don't like what it means she's thinking." That evening, with Dell's threatened scholarship still sitting like a stone in my chest, and Priya's badge granting me 2 hours of borrowed access to a server room that smelled of cold circuitry and dust, a storm broke over the city hard enough to rattle the windows, and somewhere in sub-basement 2, the backup generators kicked in half a second too late, plunging the building into a blackout that trapped Odessa, Priya, and me together behind a security door that had failed shut rather than open. In the dark, with rain slamming the high windows above us and emergency lighting bleeding red along the floor, Odessa's voice found me before her hand did. "You came back," she said. I never really left the parts that mattered. Her fingers found my wrist in the dark, not gripping, just resting there, the way you'd check that something fragile hadn't broken in transit. Her scent had changed since the boardroom, clove smoke gone sharp with something underneath it I hadn't smelled on her before. Fear, maybe, or its closest alpha cousin, the smell of control slipping despite everything she'd trained it to do. "I should have come down to the lobby," she said. I told myself it would compromise the investigation. It would have. I still should have come down. You're here now. That's not the same as being there when it mattered. I found her hand fully in the dark and held it, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all, just breathed together in a server room with a storm outside and a company on the edge of unraveling. 2 women who had spent their whole lives being punished for needing anyone, finally still enough to admit they did. "Tell me to stop," Odessa said quietly, when her thumb moved once, slow, along the inside of my wrist, testing rather than taking. If this is the wrong moment, tell me and I will. Don't stop, I said, and meant it more than I had meant anything in 6 years. We didn't do anything reckless in that dark room. Nothing the storm or the emergency lighting would have been ashamed to witness. We stayed exactly where restraint lives, her forehead against mine, her breath uneven in a way I had never once heard from the vault. And when the lights finally stuttered back on 40 minutes later, we broke apart like two people who had just discovered a door they'd both been too afraid to open, standing now on either side of it, waiting to see who would walk through first. She walked through it 3 nights later, in her own kitchen, of all places, a room I hadn't known existed until she texted an address and a single word, "Come." And I arrived to find the coldest woman in the financial district standing at a stove in a soft gray sweater, badly, earnestly attempting to recreate a dish from a recipe she'd apparently had someone track down from a diner in my hometown that had closed 9 years ago. "You mentioned it in the elevator," she said, without turning around, steam rising off a pan that smelled almost right. I wanted to get it exactly correct. I may have failed. "You didn't fail," I said, throat tight, watching Odessa Voss burn a corner of biscuit dough with the same intensity she brought to quarterly earnings calls. "You remembered. I remember everything you say," she said. "It's a design flaw. I've had it my whole life." We ate at her counter, imperfect biscuits and all, and somewhere between the second glass of wine and the storm quiet after it, she told me about Ines. My mother, the one who mattered, the one I actually had, was an omega, Odessa said, turning her glass slowly by its stem, not looking at me, the confession easier, apparently, when aimed at a countertop. Constance built this company with her business partner, Helena Cross. Helena was brilliant and warm, and everyone loved her, and for 11 years, she embezzled from her own company in increments small enough that no one noticed until it was $70 million, and Constance's entire fortune with it. When it came out, Helena disappeared before anyone could charge her. Constance needed someone to survive the wreckage on, and Ines, gentle, trusting, the one who'd vouched for Helena from the beginning, was standing closest. Her jaw tightened. The board and the press did to her what they tried to do to you 2 days ago. Constance let them. I was 14. My mother had a stroke 8 months later in this kitchen, and I found her, and Constance told me at the funeral that love is a ledger, and every entry you don't guard is a theft waiting to happen. She finally looked at me. "I have run this company for 9 years like a woman guarding a ledger. You are the first entry I haven't wanted to guard against." I told her mine in return, because a wound offered deserves one offered back. Irregular heats since 16. The word defective attached to my body by 2 different doctors, and one set of parents who'd stopped calling once I'd stopped being easy to explain at dinner parties. 6 years of suppressants that made me sick, and a career built entirely on being useful enough that no one asked what I cost to keep around. Dell's tuition. The ocean I'd never once seen despite growing up 4 hours from 3 different coastlines, because there had never once been room in the budget or the calendar for anything that wasn't survival. "You've never seen the ocean," Odessa repeated, like she was filing it somewhere permanent. "There was never time." "There's time now," she said, and reached across the counter, not for my hand this time, but for my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with a gentleness that undid something in my chest I'd been holding shut for years. "I don't apologize," she said again, softer now. The promise from 6 weeks ago returned to me changed. "But I have never once forgotten anything you've told me, and I don't intend to start." The knock at her door came 40 minutes later, hard and fast and wrong, and Priya's voice through the wood, tight with an urgency that ended the warmest night of my life before either of us was ready to let it go. "It's Feld," Priya said. "He's moved the money, all of it, tonight. And he's told the board you two have been compromising the investigation from a personal relationship since the beginning. There's a press call at 7 a.m. He's not waiting for morning to burn us. He's already lit the match." The article broke online at 6:52 a.m., 8 minutes ahead of schedule, as if Feld couldn't bear to wait even that long for the satisfaction. CEO's secret affair with suspected embezzler. Voss Capital Board demands answers. By 8, 3 networks had picked it up. By 9, the board had called an emergency session and suspended Odessa pending review. The same gavel word that had ended my career 2 weeks earlier now landing on hers. Except this time, the woman delivering it, Avril, looked almost sorry to be doing it. I watched it happen from the gallery seats at the back of the boardroom, not permitted at the table anymore. Technically, still under investigation myself, and I watched Odessa take it the way she took everything, spine straight, face arranged into the particular stillness that had once made me believe she felt nothing at all, and that I now understood was the most expensive performance of her entire life. "You should have told us the relationship at its inception," Avril said. "Instead, you let it compromise an internal investigation of historic magnitude." "The relationship didn't compromise the investigation," Odessa said. "It's the reason the investigation is nearly finished. If any of you had bothered to actually read what Miss Calloway found instead of what Mr. Feld handed you, you'd know that. Miss Calloway's credentials are the ones implicated in the theft." "Miss Calloway's credentials were stolen," Odessa said, "by a man using a badge reported lost 8 months ago, on nights that match every single unauthorized withdrawal, and I would be able to prove that to this board in full if you would give me 48 hours instead of a press release." Feld, seated where he always sat, wore grief like a well-tailored suit. "I understand this is painful, Odessa. I've known you since you were a girl. But loyalty to a person cannot outweigh loyalty to this company. Your mother built this on the principle that don't," Odessa said, and the single syllable had enough ice in it to stop him cold. "Invoke my mother in this room." They suspended her anyway, 60 days pending review, effective immediately, security escorting her from the building she had run for 9 years, while cameras outside caught the whole descent for the evening news. And somewhere in the chaos of it, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. A photo of Dell, walking to class, time-stamped an hour earlier, with 3 words underneath it. "Careful what you finish." I found Priya in the parking garage 20 minutes later, breathless, the folder from the coffee shop clutched against her chest like a shield. "I have it," she said. "All of it. The account Feld moved the money into last night, it's not offshore. He panicked and used a domestic shell he set up 11 years ago, before he was careful, before he learned better. It's sloppy. It's traceable, but I need someone who can read it fast enough to hand the board an airtight trail before the market opens tomorrow, and Odessa's suspended, and I am not the numbers person in this building." I looked at the folder, then at the photo still glowing on my phone screen, my sister's unaware face walking toward a building she had worked 11 years to be allowed inside. "Then I'm the numbers person," I said, and my voice didn't shake at all, and for the first time in 6 weeks I understood exactly what I had been building toward the whole time. From the moment I told a woman not to raise her voice at me again, to this one, standing in a parking garage with proof of a decade of theft in my hands and everyone I loved on the line. We worked through the night in Priya's apartment, blinds drawn, 3 laptops and a corkboard covered in printouts that would have made Feld's lawyers very unhappy to see, and by 4 in the morning I had what I needed, a complete trail, 14 months of withdrawals matched to badge logs, matched to a shell account 11 years old, and careless enough to still list Feld's own mother's maiden name as the security question answer, matched finally, unmistakably, to a wire he had personally authorized at 11:47 the previous night, 40 minutes after Priya's warning through Odessa's door, panicking exactly the way guilty men panic when the walls start closing. Odessa arrived at 5, having apparently not slept at all, still in the same clothes from the boardroom, and read the trail on the table in silence for 4 full minutes before she looked up. "This is enough to end him," she said. "Fraud, forgery, extortion. If we can tie the threat against your sister to his number, which Priya already has." Something moved behind her eyes, something colder and more dangerous than the boardroom stillness had ever been. "I want to be in the room when it happens. I want him to understand exactly whose hands did this to him." "Odessa," I put my hand over hers on the table. "We end him with the truth, not with whatever you're picturing right now. He threatened your sister." "He did, and he's going to answer for it in a courtroom, publicly, with every reporter who ran that article this morning watching him walk out in handcuffs instead of you." I held her gaze. "You told me once that control mistaken for strength is the thing your mother taught you. Don't let him turn you into the woman she was. Let the proof do what proof is for." She was quiet for a long moment, jaw working, and then, slowly, the coldest woman in the financial district exhaled and let something in her shoulders come down. "You stop me before I become the thing I was raised to be," she said. "No one has ever done that before." "Someone had to," I said. I volunteered. By 9 that morning, we were back in the boardroom, Odessa reinstated by an emergency vote the instant Avril saw the first page of the trail, Feld summoned under the pretense of a routine follow-up, walking in with his grief face already assembled and freezing, mid-step, when he saw the corkboard printouts blown up on the screen behind the table, his own signature on the 11:47 wire glowing 8 feet tall for the whole room to see. "This is a fabrication," he said, too fast. The practiced calm cracking for the first time in 9 years of practiced calm. "Circumstantial. Manufactured by a woman who was under investigation herself less than a week ago. The badge you used is registered to building security under your assistant's name," Priya said, sliding a final page across the table, reported lost the same week the first withdrawal occurred. "The wire from last night traces to an account that lists your mother's maiden name as its security question. And this," she set her phone on the table, the threatening text glowing on the screen. The number matched 3 lines down to a burner registered, sloppily, to an address 1 block from Feld's own apartment. "This is attempted extortion against a federal witness's family, which changes everything from a boardroom matter into a criminal one." The silence that followed had a different texture than the one 6 weeks earlier, when I'd first told Odessa not to raise her voice at me again. That silence had been the sound of a room recalibrating around one small act of courage. This one was the sound of a room watching justice finally arrive somewhere it had been owed for a very long time. Avril picked up his phone and called security, and this time it was Marcus Feld, who was escorted out under the eyes of the entire 40th floor, past Trent, who had the good sense to look genuinely afraid for the first time in the 2 years I'd known him, past the analysts who had once laughed at a joke about nesting instincts, all of them silent now, all of them watching the floor deliver its own verdict. The press conference happened 4 days later, on the front steps of the building, cameras stacked 3 deep, and Odessa Voss stood at a podium and did something the financial press would spend a full news cycle marveling over. She told the truth. All of it. The theft, the frame, the threat against my sister. And then, without a single flicker of the old stillness, she told them about me. For 9 years, I ran this company on the belief that trusting anyone with power was the fastest way to lose everything, she said. Gray eyes steady, on the cameras, on the crowd, on me where I stood just off to the side, with Dell's hand gripped tight in mine. I inherited that belief from a tragedy that took someone I loved, and I have spent 9 years mistaking the armor for the wound underneath it. Wren Calloway found a decade of theft that 4 audits missed. She did it while being told her instincts were less than the men who kept losing the trail. She is the best financial mind this company has had in a generation, and she is the reason I understand, for the first time since I was 14 years old, that trust is not a liability. It is a choice, and I am making it, publicly, today. The crowd's murmur rose and fell like weather. Somewhere in it, a reporter shouted a question about the relationship, about impropriety, about optics, and Odessa didn't flinch from a single word of it. "I love her," she said simply, into a bank of microphones, in front of the city, in front of the board, in front of Trent Ashby standing at the back of the crowd with an expression like a man watching his own smallness finally get a name read aloud. I raised my voice at her once, in front of 40 people, and she told me exactly what it would cost me if I did it again. It's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 15 years, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure I never give her a reason to say it twice. She found my eyes across the crowd, and everything that had happened in 6 weeks, the boardroom, the blackout, the biscuits burned on purpose to get exactly right, the mug repaired in gold, folded down into one long look that said, more clearly than any microphone could, everything I needed to hear. That night, in her apartment, with the city lights strung out below the window like something spilled and glittering, she asked me with her words the way the profile of her whole life had trained her never to ask for anything. "Tell me if this is too soon," she said, her hand at the curve of my throat, over the gland that had been aching, low and insistent, for 3 days in a way I hadn't let myself name yet. "Tell me if you need more time than tonight, and I will wait as long as it takes." "But if you're ready," her voice caught, just once, the only crack I'd ever heard in it that wasn't grief, "I want to ask you to be mine. Properly, with everything that means." "Ask me," I said, "with your words." "Wren Calloway," Odessa said, forehead against mine, clove smoke and wet slate gone warm and close as a held breath. "Will you let me claim you? Will you let me be the last voice you ever have to warn twice?" "Yes," I said, and the bond that had been building since a server room in a storm finally found its full shape between us, her mouth at my throat, gentle and certain. The bite landing exactly where I'd asked her to place it, and somewhere in the golden ache that followed I felt, for the first time in 29 years, entirely and irrevocably seen. 6 months later, Dell walked across a stage in a cap and gown with her nursing pin catching the light, and Odessa cried, actually cried, in a way the financial press would never have believed if they'd seen it, gripping my hand so hard I had to remind her, laughing, that my sister could see us from the stage. The board confirmed Marcus Feld's conviction on 11 counts in the spring, the sentencing hearing carried live by 3 networks that had once run his talking points without question. He'll be an old man before he sees the outside of a cell again. And the extortion charge tacked on for the threat against Dell ensured the judge showed him none of the mercy the old Marcus Feld had counted on his charm to buy. Trent Ashby resigned before the board could fire him, which everyone on the 40th floor understood as exactly the same thing with better paperwork. Priya took over as chief operating officer, and the first thing she did with the promotion was frame the grainy security still that had cracked the whole case open and hang it in her new office, a small monument to the night she'd decided to trust a suspended analyst over a company legend. Odessa proposed on a beach in October, on a strip of Atlantic coastline 4 hours from where I grew up and had never once had time to visit, kneeling in the cold sand with a small worn box that had, she told me, belonged to Innies, and asking me, formally, with her words, exactly the way I had taught her to ask for everything that mattered. We married in the spring, in a garden behind the house we'd bought together, with vows short enough not to embarrass either of us in front of witnesses, and honest enough to make Priya, of all people, cry without shame in the second row. Odessa's vow ended the same way our whole story had started. "I don't apologize," she said, hand steady in mine, and the whole garden laughed, gently, warmly, because everyone there knew the story by then. "But I have never once forgotten you, and I never will, for as long as I'm given to keep that promise." The mug sits on our kitchen counter now, gold seams and all, next to a stove Odessa still insists on using herself whenever she wants to get a recipe exactly right, and some mornings, when the light comes in low and gold across the counter the way it did the first night she told me the truth about Ines, I catch her humming, low and off-key, a 3-note lullaby I taught her without meaning to. The one my mother used to hum over that same recipe, passed now into a kitchen my mother never got to see, in a life I never once believed I was allowed to want. I spent most of my life making myself small enough that no one would ever need to raise their voice at me twice. It took one woman, cold to everyone but me, to teach me that being seen was never the danger I'd been warned about. The danger was staying invisible long enough to forget I deserved to be found. I am not invisible anymore. I never will be again. The end.